So this is the 𝐼𝐸 Summit. I'm Cristine Hull, and this is the 11th 𝐼𝐸 Summit. I started these in late 2021, and you're going to be hearing about the second 𝐼𝐸 Summit, which was on 2/22/22. So I did plan that, and I did plan this year's summit to finish up on 2/22. So a little bit of an anniversary thing, and the impact of this has grown over the years. There are more and more people that I don't know showing up, and I love the idea of getting to know. So I'm curious by the show of hands, and you can put in the chat workbook if you got yourself a workbook. This is the new thing. I had no idea how many days it was going to take, but oh my gosh, I started printing it. I hope you did double-sided. It was thick. It was quite thick. So I ended up stapling mine per day. So, no, that's an option. And I love my team. I just have to say, thank you, my team, for putting this together. So Leanne here, I think she might be able to say hi. But she is my writer, and so she basically did most of the workbook. And I love that if you notice how it works, you've got, first of all, my gratitude, she's in there. She didn't know I added that on. And and then know that there's a ton of live links. I made sure to work with it a couple times so that the live links are all there in the workbook. But make sure to right-click to open the live link if you're working with it in a electronic version, because you'll lose the workbook the second you open the link. So so I put a little note in there on that. Then on your overview page, you'll see that there are all of the presenters. You just click on their name and it takes you to their page. Harley, thank you. That was really brilliant. So that's super fun. And then Joanne is my assistant from Pennsylvania. Harley sits, like, she's actually in my other office, but she is super nearby, and Joanne is a few miles. But Joanne's going to put things in the chat here and there and prompt us with, links to experience in the chat. And so the first link she'll put in there is the page where if you want to still get the workbook, you can, and it's available for whatever donation level and contribution level you want to make. So we've had huge response from people. I have some people that have done, I recognize from many summits. Shane, I have to say, shout out to you. Good to see you again. This is probably your fifth, or I don't know how many, but you've been on a few. Thank you for being a loyal follower. And I see other names I recognize as well. And we have some presenters here, and I love it when the presenters show up and are part of receiving as well. So we just finished up with our meditation group. It went really well. So we have kind of this unique opportunity on, especially before the summits, where we gather the presenters and we set intention, and we focus on like what is really important about this. And I have to say, we invited people to tune into our own level of fulfillment. And so as you go through this, I would like to invite you to do that as well. That fulfillment is tricky because a lot of us have a mindset that fulfillment is out there somewhere, right? Kind of like heaven awaits, right? Once we get this done or finish this degree or have, our kids are a certain age, or we can travel, or, like, what is your what, like, when this, then? I'm kind of curious. You can put it in the chat if you can relate to that. And it could be that, yes, your divine design says that this really does matter. It's not that it's wrong to have a thing that you're like, okay, when this, then that. And I have one. I'll admit, like, I have a thing that I don't feel complete. Now I could look at that two different ways. One, there are certain things that I sense are waiting for me. And you get to hear my story today about what one of those was. And it just fills my heart, because when you go through life in a sense of like waiting for something or someone or this thing, and then it does happen, it is so complete, okay? It is so fulfilling that if you didn't have that absence of, you wouldn't really be able to appreciate it. And so we do want to acknowledge those things. And so I'm curious if that thing lines up in one of those 5 areas that we're going to talk about. And so as we go along and you kind of like get tuned into it, please feel free to share. Like, this area is not complete for me and I am searching. You know, I'd love to know. We'd love to know and support. But that part of that journey is what I will be sharing as I go through kind of an introduction to me and to the 5 life areas and to the frequency model. So we will begin. Here we are. So the title is Raise Your Frequency in 5 Life Areas. And we will talk about physical, but we're going to kind of summarize the whole picture here. All right. So I'm going to start with 1984. Oops. What you will learn. That's what I'm going to start with. Okay, let's get the right ones on. How do you determine your frequency? What are the 5 life areas? And at which frequency do you find fulfillment? This is the big one, okay? If you were to ask a question, that's the question I would want to ask, because that's what I would want to know. Like, where is that thing that I've been waiting for, right? Okay. So now I get to start in 1984. Back in 1984, I'd started this high school. It was the first year of Mountain Crest High School in Hiram, Utah. I am back in Hiram, Utah. I have to say, a mile away from that high school. So I see it almost every day. The interesting thing about 1984, so I had just moved. I had basically been going through trauma. I didn't realize how much trauma. We didn't talk about trauma in 1984. If any of you can remember it, that was just not a word that we used. So we didn't really talk much about therapy and, psychology topics. It was more or less, there was a lot of religious discussion. And so what I had learned growing up is that there's good people and bad people. And this model of life, I think a lot of people relate to it. It was kind of black and white, as you see on the screen. So you've got your good, and that's what your goal is to get to the good. And then you got your bad, and those are the people that go to prison and that get into drugs, and then there's this pile of bad stuff. And as you see my music examples, I was told that's bad music. Who remembers that when you play Stairway to Heaven backwards, then you get all these weird messages from the dark side. Carlos raises his hand. I laugh at it now because it was very much an indoctrinated world, right? It's like very black and white, very extreme. So I had these choices. I can be in the marching band and do good things and listen to good music and hang out with good people, or I can go hang out with the outcasts and listen to the really good music, right? And and explore this thing that's really curious, and it actually really isn't as dark and scary as I was told it was. So 1984 was the year I kind of flipped sides. And because here was part of it, is that I had tried for so long to be good. I had been if you think of the image of, or the analogy of rowing a boat, I had been rowing for years and I'd done all these good things and I was not happy and I did not have my reward. And it was kind of one of those, well, if this is heaven, give me hell. It was like, this isn't working. And so what else is there? So that was my journey in 1984. Okay. So some of you may relate to that. It's, obviously it changed. But if you look at my rowboat, here was the biggest problem, is that I was not rowing with 2 oars. I had been doing this life journey with 1 oar. And the problem is that when you row with 1 oar, what happens? You go in circles, right? There's very little progress, and this is set up on the boat, as you see that it's locked in. And so it's not like I can go back and forth. Like, I was rowing in circles for all those years. And so what happened is when I just decided and so you understand this a little more about the oars, that it's the faith and works oars. Okay. So faith is the idea that I trust the process. I'm going to be, a beer kind of way. And then the doer is the works. And like, I'm going to do all these right things. Well, I had a lot of doings, but not a lot of beings. And so I threw out the doings Like, I'm just not gonna do it anymore. And then I did move. I just didn't move upstream. I moved downstream, right? So what I did not see coming is the waterfall. And I've done like broken boats, but when I saw the alligator, I'm like, yeah, that was probably closer to it. So by 1988, I had basically become addicted. And my drug of choice was cocaine. It was the 80s. And I hit a bottom that I couldn't find a way out of. Like, I knew I was trapped. And part of that being trapped was that in my spiritual journey, I now understand it looking back. And I actually they'll tell this story. I have a book that hasn't been totally released and published yet, but in it, I kind of allude to the idea that there was this moment in time where I became addicted. It wasn't before, it wasn't after, it was that moment in time. And what I believe happened is that my field, and we're going to talk about morphogenetic fields and auric bodies and things like that, my field opened up, and I was not me after that. Like, there was something else that was in my boat, if you want to call it that, in my center, and it could be an entity, it could be a thought form, whatever it was. I was addicted from that moment on, and I had no power to get out of it because it wasn't out there, it was in here. That addict took over. So it was an interesting experience that I can now say was meant to be. It took a few months in that 1988 journey before I surrendered. And in that surrender, I had my first awakening. And so that first awakening, I now have a book called Ladder of Love for the First Awakening, because I realized you don't have to get into a drug addiction to have a first awakening, but that's what it took for me. And so I had a spiritual awakening that changed me overnight. Just like the drugs changed me in that one moment, I also, as you know, and this is the fabulous positive side of polarity, had an instant healing. And that was very real. And that impacted me more, I would say, today in my life than almost any other event. Okay. So there is the example of that moment where I was changed, and it was nothing of my doing other than my surrender that allowed that change to happen. So I was placed back on my boat at that. And because of this faith experience, I now had 2 oars. So this is the kind of the beginning of the frequency journey, as you see. So I kind of layered the good, bad, gray in here, because where I found myself was this kind of spot where I hadn't figured out how to get past it. Like, I had circled around something, but I'd never gone forward until this point in time. And I finally was equipped for movement. And that is what changed the direction. So by 1998, so this is 10 years later, I do kind of facetiously, but really, I tell the story. I married the drug dealer. That was my biggest problem, is that and in 1989, he and I decided to do this thing together, and it kind of worked out and it kind of didn't. So what happened is that he never really left that lifestyle. He learned how to hide it. And I had been truly changed. And so from that, 1988 on, I had 10 years recovery in 1998, and it was solid. It was real. And I was still progressing, whereas he hadn't really moved. So I was in a really tough spot. So here are the things in my world. I have a picture of the church in Lewiston, Utah, tiny little town. I was going to Al-Anon regularly. I finally got my sponsor in, I think it was 98. And that one decision to get a sponsor and work with that sponsor every single week is what moved me to the next level. Recovery is a journey. And so I was truly in recovery. I was a substance abuse counselor, and I was surrounded by addiction, and I was not well. I will just say that. So I tried antidepressants in 1998. And some of you who may have had bipolar disorder know that there are certain things that will activate bipolar disorder. I didn't know I had it until I took an antidepressant, and then I went off the rails. So my family didn't know if I'd get my mind back. It was really scary. And when I did, and I stopped taking the medications that I thought were helping me so much, I was in a total mania. And I finally got myself back together again. I realized I had to do something different. And that was my new adventure into understanding natural medicine, basically nutritional medicine. So Potatoes Not Prozac was one of the first books I bought. And I started to understand that there is a solution outside of antidepressants. I mean, SSRIs were like the really big thing at that point in time, but they weren't the thing for me. And so I had to find other answers. And I ended up writing this book later. It wasn't written in 98, but it became the journey that became 10 Ways to Balance Your Brain Chemistry. It's actually, that's like the second edition. It's in now the fourth edition. So it's evolved as I have. And I had a lot of issues with money. I will say that's my little corner, little up, diagram up there. I financially couldn't figure out how I was going to get out, but I had to get out. And so through miracles, through weekly fasting. So weekly, every Sunday, I would fast. And I remember it cleared my mind, it cleared my body, and it allowed me to find a higher level of faith. And it was faith that got me out of where I was at. And so my husband at the time had gone back to drug dealing. He was dealing meth, right in our town. And when people started showing up at the door that scared me, I realized I had to leave. And I left with my two little children. That I had a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old at 1998. And it was hard. It was heartbreakingly hard. It was a thing that I needed to open me up to the next frequency and the next level of faith. And really where my journey, I think, began again. So I'm curious if you are familiar with the roller coaster lifestyle, because we're going to talk about how the frequencies work, but that was a roller coaster time for sure. Okay. In January 2004, so this is now 6 years later, I'd been single and I was working as a school psychologist, and I had found rapid eye technology. So you're going to hear from Tamara Lang on Saturday, and she's part of that world that emerged in the early 2000s of rapid eye technicians. I was still dealing with the broken heart of I'd had a couple of relationships, I think, by then. There's a picture of my kids. They were older, they were at that time, about 8 and 12. And I had a journey ahead of me, and I was not living with them. This is the thing that, talk about a faith journey. And it was not easy, but my source said, I get to leave. And the kids ended up being raised by their father. So it was actually a really important time in his sobriety. Like, he had a period of sobriety during that time, but it was hard. But what I got to do is I had the freedom to explore things like Hay House conferences. And I went to Vegas to a Hay House conference, and I met people like Dr. Hawkins right there. I don't know if anybody got to see him in person, but he was up in front. I was a few yards away from this man who's become he is such a pioneer. He is such a leader of higher consciousness, and he's passed away now, but it was amazing to get to see him in real life. He wrote the book Power versus Force. If you don't have a copy of that or know about that, make it, you're gonna have quite a big book list by the end of this week, but get that on there. All right. And Gary Craig. Okay, so anybody here familiar with Gary Craig? So I was doing the actual original EFT certification. It wasn't really a certification. He was really clear about that. You're not getting certified, but here it is. And he was super generous. He made it available for people that didn't have financial means to do a whole lot. And that was me. I had actually I went to grad school in the midst of all this and got my master's so I could be a school psychologist. But that was, I mean, I was just getting on my feet. And so it was really important that I had that available. And I learned emotional freedom technique, which we're going to talk about on Friday more. Maybe Thursday. Sorry, Thursday more. Okay, so here's the new model. So after I found Dr. Hawkins and I discovered the map, he laid out a map. And actually, the true story is I figured out the map and then I found Dr. Hawkins and realized there's numbers that go with the map. So that's the whole thing I talk about in frequency school. But the map that I've laid out, I had a clear awareness of 7 levels, not 3. Okay, so grew up with this black and white world. And then in this 1 week period of time, I was actually teaching in a prison. So it was ironic. I ended up, I never actually went to prison until I started teaching there. But I just realized as I was getting all these downloads and learning these principles that were higher principles for solutions, that there were 7 levels. And so when I saw Dr. Hawkins' map, it really coincided really well. So that's this. I don't break down the numbers a lot. I pretty much just do the 100, 200, and call them different levels, if that makes sense. So we're going to talk about what those are. Okay. So first of all, let's look at if you look up map of consciousness, you'll see a lot of versions of this online. So the frequency of emotion, and this is adapted from the map of consciousness in Dr. Hawkins' book, Power versus Force. But what it basically is, and you could take a moment and just sit down with this if you wanted to, but look at what emotions come up when you think about your physical condition. So this would be your health, exercise regime, freedom from disease, diet, okay? And just look on the left and look at, is there an emotion that comes up? Hope, maybe. I hope I lose weight, right? 310. Okay, now look at your social relationships. There could be, like I was dealing with at that point in time, some loss, some grief, some things that are hard about that. Okay, so you look at, there's a frequency there. Financial career, it might be fear-based. It might be like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, or what's going to happen because this new administration is really doing a lot of stuff. I don't understand. Or you might be really secure. Okay. Psychological. So that's where we definitely see the emotions, right? Do you spend more time in anger or apathy, or more time in acceptance and meaning? And then spiritual. So spiritual is another one. You might see some of those higher frequencies in. So a lot of the people we work with, and this is what's unique. So this is not something you'll probably see in Dr. Hawkins' work, is the thing that I figured out is that there's not just one number that we can assign to our condition. Like our condition is multiple things. And so we are probably different frequency in our physical well-being than we are in our spiritual. I see a lot of contrast there. Anybody agree? Can you see that? Yes. How about a lot of contrast between our financial and our spiritual, or our relationships, right? And our, and so it's like some of them go together, but some of them are very different. So that's why we have a day devoted to each one. So our invitation is that you figure out which day you really need some extra help with, and we will provide it. Okay. So when we talk about the frequency model, a frequency is everything in the universe, including thoughts, emotions, and bodies, is made of energy that vibrates at different frequencies. By understanding the different frequencies of vibration, we can learn to control our thoughts and emotions, and we can create the reality we desire. How does that sound? Okay, so we create that reality in these 5 different areas. Okay. Now, there is a chart. You'll see it in your handout if you have, or in your workbook if you have it, or you can see it here, that lists out some examples of physical, emotional, spiritual, occupational, social levels. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those. I'm going to move on. But I would like you to also look at on the next page the rock climber. So the rock climber, we see 5 different areas. And this is where we look at if you were to be a rock climber, you may have your spiritual might be your top frequency. Okay, so that's like a hand up. The next highest might be your mental emotional. Then your torso represents one. And then we've got like financial as a foot. And then your lowest, and this is what I call the lowest common denominator. That's like the lowest foot. So as a rock climber, what has to move next? Looking at this positioning for any kind of real motion. Can she reach higher with her spiritual and get further? No. What would it be? I'm not sure if I should go into the chat because I'll lose my screen. Carlos, you want to yell it out? I see you on.
She's got to move her foot.
Which one?
The right one.
The right foot. Okay, so the lowest common denominator has to come up first,
Yep.
right? And we could say that was financial because Carlos is going to be here tomorrow and talking about financial solutions, but it is like
that would be financial. I bet that would be. Yeah.
It could be for a lot of people. So that's what you get to figure out right now is you get to look at your rock climber, okay? And you can write this on your paper if you don't have a workbook, but what are your 5 areas? So as we kind of go through these, you'll look at that. And then Joanne's also going to put in the chat, if you would like to take our frequency assessment, it's available. And so this is basically how you fill out a form and it helps you to see that in the assessment. Okay. So let's just look at physical because that's what we're talking about today. Is in physical health, 100 is disease-ridden, incapacitated. So this is someone who's basically not leaving their home. They're wheelchair bound or they're dying of cancer. Like it's like not good. Like it's beginning of the end. So 200 is dependent on medications, okay, substances. So that's like you're functioning, but either you're like a functional alcoholic or you can't go without your X, Y, or Z. Okay. 300 is like your typical American diet, lifestyle, mild illnesses. You get sick on a regular basis or whatever, as often as anybody else. 400 is healthy routines, daily effort, self-discipline happens with that. But then you get to like 500, and this is when it really gets good. Health conscious. You have this mastery over your physical. Like something is bigger than your body in what, but you're not disconnected from it. It's like you're fully engaged in your physical condition and practices. And then 600, we talk about this a little bit tomorrow. So make sure to come back tomorrow because we won't have time today to get into what the 600 looks like, but Carlos and I are going to actually walk you through that tomorrow morning. So we're going to kind of finish off the physical transformation process. It's kind of like a bridge tomorrow and talk about high frequency health and wealth. All right. So the same kinds of things happen with emotional and social. And so where we're kind of just sticking with physical today, just know like what this is though, is it's not that a 100 frequency is bad. And so in the frequency school training, you learn each of these frequency levels actually has a purpose. And when you, rather than ignoring and not dealing with it, you find what's there for you, you'll find that at these lower frequencies, sometimes you will, once you face it and resolve it, you find your physical health, you find your power, you balance your masculine, feminine energy, you get that money energy working for you. Okay. So there are some secrets I'm not going to share right now, but there are secrets to the makeup of all of it, of the whole thing is really what this is. 200 frequency, you can see it corresponds with critical change. Like you can't just row in a circle anymore. Like once you really get the lesson of that, you break free of habituation and dependency on non-solutions. And at a 300, you start to establish routines that really move your life forward. So you're not habituated in the old stuff, but you move forward with consistency. You can find tools that really allow you to claim your personal power and boundaries. So that's what each of these is correlated to a solution. Now, I'm going to share about my 400 level. Okay, so this is a fast forward because we were in 2004 and all of a sudden we're 10 years later. Okay, but here's what happened is that in this 10-year period, I started with all these solutions and I had a life that was really worth living. I was in, and there was some really good stuff. Okay, so I'd restored family. I had my kids back. I had an amazing lifestyle. I had a husband who was an amazing provider, and the kids lived with us, and we lived up in Cache Valley, and it was like just like a lot of good things were going on. I'd finished up with my role as a school psychologist, and by 2014 I was fully in a role in private practice. So I was kind of in charge of what I was creating. So a couple of things came along. So I'm going to tell you about the good stuff first. One was I discovered some things called frequency formulas. Well, it's what I call them because I have a private label on them now. But what they were a quantum-based solution to more or less correcting things in your information fields. Okay, so very cool. And I started working with a former Buddhist monk. The reason I started doing all this, though, is kind of on the left side. So I was workaholic mode. So I started this journey of creating conferences and really cool things for people. And I ended up having a crash and burn at midnight one night. Because based on this one story, I applied to speak along with Bridget Cook at the International Association of Near-Death Studies. So I'm going to go into this in a little more detail. So what happened is that I was dealing with an allergic reaction because of gut issues. When you hear from Heidi Stimson today, she knows what she's talking about. Because my body was going into an autoimmune reaction, and I was having these reactions from foods that it wasn't like one thing. Because of gut issues, my body was reacting to things and fighting things at a level that put me into an anaphylactic shock. So I went into one of these states, and I'd already kind of determined by working with this monk that I found that my greatest fear is that I would cease to exist. That was my deepest, darkest fear. And in that, he said, well, that's an interesting fear to have, because he said, if that were to happen, then who or what would be afraid? Like there would be nothing there to have any fear beyond that. And I was kind of like contemplating that around the time that I went into this reaction. And I literally did cease to exist for about 2 hours. It was a consciousness state that was so not there. It was like I was not conscious of passing out. There was no me to come back to. It was like a void beyond anything I can even to this day try to describe. It was true and total nothingness. And so when I came to several hours later, it was like I'd been mind wiped. I couldn't speak, I couldn't form words, and I couldn't walk. So I went back to an infancy state. All I could do was just kind of this yelling, and I couldn't even figure out how to make the words come. And finally, my husband and my daughter found me and carried me to bed, and it took me a good 48 hours to even get back to normal functioning. So luckily, I came back to normal functioning, but it was something that was so profound that when it happened, I had to pay attention and look at what am I doing literally that put me in that state. And I recommitted to working with the Buddhist monk and his teachings. And from there, things got very different in my life. And that's where I started to find quantum solutions. That's where I started to accept the quantum path. And Amy Walker's on here because she was the first person that I reached out to. It was like, that was the one thing that happened the day that I was in the, you know, like after the void was, she had a call setter, you know, talk to me, and I found something about balancing family and work. That's what it was about. And it was like, oh, life says this is the one thing that you need to do is balance family and work. And so she became my mentor after that. So the roller coaster. That is, and I think it's really good for you to look at this on a scale of 1 to 10. How ready are you to get off of the roller coaster? Because this is what changed everything for me. The 400 is worth getting to, and it's too hard to stay in. Let me just tell you that. So take a note of these questions because we don't have time right now to fill them out, but these are things that you really want to look at as you go through the next 5 days. Are you ready to surrender what you're clinging to? Interesting. Okay. Has your heart been broken, and have you kept it open? Because when your heart breaks, if you close in, it lowers your frequency. Okay. Do I take full responsibility for my life today? Because if you are a victim, you cannot get past 300. I promise. And are you already out of the box, but staying really close just in case? Okay. Look at that. I saw a smile. Okay. Because here's what I would like to invite you to look at is what I discovered is a journey from the 100 to 300. We do that in frequency school. 400 is our liberation training. It's a breakthrough model. And then comes the 500. So the 500, the question is that real? Yes, it is real. This is my 500 world. It actually involved a divorce and a remarriage. And I will introduce my husband, Todd, on Saturday. But this is the kind of world we have. It is so rich and fulfilling. It is so colorful. I got my music back. We are at a Def Leppard concert. We actually do a lot harder. He's taken me to Pantera and Metallica. And I'm like, yeah, this was not what I listened to back in the 80s. But we've written a book together, Being at Zero. He is, along with several other contributors from the 2022 summits and then some. And we have a spiritual world. And we go to Joe Dispenza advanced retreat. It was amazing. Okay. This is Dr. Joe's #1 fan. You see that on his t-shirt. And I run this program, the Love Solve Academy, and I do it as it doesn't, I'm making the decision that I'm doing enough of that for it to work. And so this is the last, opportunity this spring. I'm not going to do it in the summer. I'm going to take my summer off. Okay. So if you'd like to be part of it and experience this with me, I would love to have you. And here's some quick, because I don't want to take up more than my time, but I love data. I will tell you that. I really love data. And so we use assessments. We track things using things like the frequency assessment, which you're invited to take, and other things. This is kind of fun to rate yourself on this scale of a 1 to 10, where 1 is intolerable and 10 is ideal. So this is basically the 5 life areas plus some, because it's got personal as well as we break down social and relationships, I think, on this. So social being like friends, and relationships being more like like significant others. So if you want to look at this, I will tell you, you can rate yourself. The highest score you can get is a 70. Okay, the scale will go from like a 50s is kind of like a high end for a lot of people, and then down to like 20s. And I've had some people go like up 20 marks in just the life satisfaction during these programs. Okay, here's an example on the frequency assessment where we have people that go from like the 200s up to the 300s. Okay, so this is showing like over 3 months in the program, like a 182 in psychological up to a 363. Isn't that amazing? And overall 241, 305, 359. And so there's fluctuations. I mean, it's a real, it's not just, people aren't just, saying what you want to hear. Like, we see some peaks and valleys and it fluctuates. But I mean, look at this one, social, 225 to 425, 200-point gain in frequency in this matter of months. And so that's what I like to see for people is let's shift things and let's see what it looks like when you do that. Okay. Mindfulness and self-compassion is something else we look at that increases. You know, we got average going up to excellent almost. And this is where I'm planning on writing us a journal article that addresses the need to have more of this kind of scale out there. So in the mental health world, we don't really assess severity. And when I have people come in, I will look at how severe are your symptoms, and we go across 7 different disorders. So like anxiety, depression, PTSD, and bipolar, kind of manic cyclothymia is what it's called. And then we look at it over time, and you can see like in 2 months, this is massive, you guys. 60 days, we go from high severity, moderate to high severity, down to almost subclinical. Okay, and this is not meds. This is true frequency technology, if you want to call it that, from a standpoint of personal change. And there's another, this is 18 different people on average. So going from an 80 down to 42, half as many clinical symptoms in a matter of, you know, through the training, basically. So this is real. And this is the kind of thing I would like to see more mental health people being accountable to in the system. And then there's this whole thing called ego structure. So we're going to talk about that on Friday. And so if you're curious about what this looks like, this is true personality change that will happen over time. Not even like that's in 60 days as well. Like what is up with that, right? How does this happen? This happens through quantum solutions, not through one area of, you know, let's just change your behavior. So, okay, so there I am and I'm on time. Woohoo! So I look forward to speaking with you each day. I'll be, you know, sharing a little bit more of some of these solutions and bringing on people that are part of that solution.